we'll get started. So, thanks for joining us today. We are going to be covering the Metric Insights BI portal and how that helps you drive better engagement with ROI in your organizations around your BI programs. Um, Typical webinars, we are recording this, so we'll send out a link afterwards if you want to review it or share it with anyone. Feel free to enter any questions in the chat window or Q&A window. We'll answer those either as we go along or leave some time at the end to get to those. My name's Mike Smitherman. Look after sales and marketing over here at Metric Insights, and I'm going to be taking you through sort of a few slides that talk about the need for a BI portal and what sort of the driving force is for companies who invest in technology like this. And then we'll spend the bulk of the time for this webinar looking through the product. We had our latest 7 release recently. For those that have seen any of Metric Insights in the past, you'll see some new stuff in this as well. So let's get kicked off here. So let's start with sort of talking about why people start thinking about a BI portal and what drives them to go down this path. And it's really organizations who have somewhat become the victim of their own success in terms of their BI programs and initiatives. So these organizations typically don't have any lack of data and reporting in the organization. The challenge has become it's kind of overgrown itself and become a bit unwieldy. And so the questions they start asking themselves are similar to these in terms of suddenly we're in a situation where there are multiple sources of reporting and BI around the organization. And do we really understand what all those sources are that we're asking our end users to go to get access to the information they need? And when they look at those tools, understanding what the engagement is with users who have access to those tools. Are we getting effective usage of those tools? Are we getting effective usage in the different tools and technologies that we're paying for and we're paying licenses for? And within those tools and technologies, we're creating a lot of reporting, a lot of dashboards, a lot of analytics. And again, there's no lack of that content, but what percentage of those reports and dashboards and analytics are actually getting utilized on a day-to-day basis? Because anything that is going underutilized, it has a cost to us, where we're potentially paying for compute power if it's being driven by a database where we're paying based on capacity and queries. It's taking maintenance hours to support those reports and dashboards. And so understanding that is critical to saying, are we being effective in our BI program? And then organizations are investing a lot these days in data catalogs like an Elation or an Atlan or a Calibra, and spending money around data governance initiatives, rolling those out. But do we really understand how that is playing into our BI environments and how that is contributing towards the success of our BI programs? So these are the sort of questions that start to spark ideas in organizations' minds to say, okay, maybe we can be getting a better handle on these sort of initiatives if we could answer these questions in a better way and see exactly what's going on. And so in a lot of cases, when you look at these questions and you answer them in your environment, the numbers are not where we want them to be. We have multiple sources, that might be all right, but the engagement with users and content and the tools that we have out there is not where we want it. The reason for that in a lot of organizations, again, is not because we have a lack of BI and reporting that people need. It's all out there somewhere. But as we've said, this low usage and engagement is often because we've made it somewhat too challenging for end users. And when I talk about end users, I'm particularly talking about sort of the big business consumers of BI. We've made it particularly challenging for them to find the content and trust the content that they're interested in. And again, that's because there's typically multiple sources out there where they can go and look for it. Over time, the BI environments that we have and the tools and technologies often become bloated with content. And that's because, typically every report that we create, every analysis that we create has somewhat of a shelf life associated with it as the business changes over time. Reports become less useful. Oftentimes they become obsolete. And so in a lot of cases, that type of content sort of hangs around with the stuff that we're expecting people to use on the current day-to-day basis, and again creates a confusing experience. Also, there tends to be a lot of duplicative content. So, we have reports and dashboards out there. Analysts come in, they don't know what else is being created in the organization. They end up creating things that are the same or very similar to stuff that is out there already. As an end user, again, how do I know what I should be trusting, which version of a report I should be using in those sort of environments? And so we're creating a very confusing and fragmented user experience for our end users in particular. So what we're striving towards then is an environment that is obviously a lot more managed and governed, and it's an environment where we can rationalize those tools and content that we've been talking about to understand what we really need and what really should be out there at any point in time for users to be making use of. So again, looking at things like obsolete content and duplicative content that we can get rid of. It's about installing a process, a content lifecycle management process that ensures that if we can get a clean environment for our users when it comes to BI, that we're not creating a problem in the future. So that's about understanding what content is getting created, onboarding that content in an effective way, and then offboarding it as it becomes obsolete or not relevant anymore. It's an environment where we can govern the content in a much more effective way. And that's everything from documenting reports that we make available to end users so that they understand exactly what they contain, what metric definitions are in there, who owns those reports, certifying those reports so that we know that, or an end user knows that they can trust them. Um, it includes attaching any sort of usage or security policies, data compliance policies to the point of consumption, so a user knows exactly, how they should be using the report and what is allowed and what is not allowed. And ultimately, it's about creating a seamless end user experience so that when they access BI, they know what they should be using, they know how they should be using it, they can be literate around it and know what they can trust. For driving their day-to-day jobs. So that's the environment we're striving towards. So let's talk about the BI portal as a solution to that, and obviously particularly metric insights implementation of this. I'm going to take you through sort of the layers of the platform here, talk about what we're going to look at in the product demo itself. So any portal starts with being able to plug into really any source of BI analytics reporting data in the organization. And obviously, this is the BI tools that you have in place. Oftentimes, we'll see multiple BI tools across an organization of any size. But even if you're sort of a single platform BI tool organization, oftentimes they can get pretty large. Maybe you're using Tableau, but you have a number of Tableau instances out there. Maybe you're primarily Power BI, but you have a number of tenants of that. Even in those cases as well, oftentimes, I'm sure everyone has documents and spreadsheets and PowerPoints, whatever it might be, that constitute sort of reporting and BI that users have to access as well. They may be up on SharePoint or shared drive somewhere. But for a portal to be effective, we need to be able to plug into any source of BI. That also might be reporting in operational applications as well, like Salesforce or Zendesk or something like that. So we're going to plug into any source that's out there. What those plugins do in our environment is effectively when we connect to a system, we start to monitor what content is getting created on those tools and technologies. So every time reports and dashboards get published, we understand what's out there. We also connect to the metadata that exists within these tools to understand what those reports are. So any sort of descriptions, names, images of those reports, so we can get previews, that sort of thing, we'll look at in the tool. But we'll pick up any metadata, including things like usage as well, if that's being tracked in those tools. Once we're connected to the sources, the first sort of stage of implementation is about that rationalization process that I spoke about. So it's what we call BI ops, and it's about understanding things like, okay, out of everything that's available in these tools, what is relevant? So what is obsolete because it's not being used anymore that we might want to tidy up? What are potential duplicates that we may want to look at rationalizing and trimming down? And we do that by investigating that metadata that we just spoke about, understanding reports that are similar, understanding usage where we can get it. Um, and we then instigate the concept of a publishing workflow where the remaining content that we want people accessing and using on a daily basis that gets created goes through a workflow process that publishes it into the portal that we'll see in a minute. One side note here is that metadata is important to this process, so understanding what the content is, where it's coming from. As I mentioned, we pick up a level of metadata from the tools themselves. Metadata might also come from your data catalog initiatives. So if you've got a Calibra or an Atlan or an Elation or a Purview where you're documenting the underlying data tables out there, or even some of the BI content as well, we can connect to those tools as well, and we can sync in metadata to the reports that we're going to publish into the portal. So we clean up the environment. We set a workflow process for publishing content into the concept then of a centralized catalog. So one place where we can organize and give users access and search around the content that we're publishing in a certified way to that catalog. So obviously we'll look at this in the demo, but it's really one place again to organize and access reporting and BI, irrespective of the underlying tools and technologies that that content was created in. We'll talk about permissions and security. Obviously, any catalog needs to be synced up with your internal security and permission structure, whether that's being managed in Active Directory, LDAP, whether it's being managed in the tools themselves. We want to ensure that users accessing this catalog are getting access to the content that they should have permission to see. Within the Metric Insights portal, we've introduced this idea of what we call our concierge. Think of this as an AI, LLM-driven layer on top of the catalog that enhances the experience for users when it comes to finding content, when it comes to understanding what they can do with that content, how to interact with it and the portal itself. It's obviously a collaborative interface to that where I can discuss what I'm interested in with the concierge as a way of then interacting with the content that's in the catalog. That is something that's also available through collaboration tools like Slack and Teams. So if I'm searching for content, if I have a question about what reports are available that will help me understand revenue across our online business, I can have that conversation and be served up the content from the catalog that might help me answer those questions. The final layer that we'll look at in the demonstration is any portal initiative. Obviously, the process of cataloging and organizing content and governing content and certifying content is a critical piece of the process. But as a user, and a user in the business who may be thinking about BI for a couple of minutes every day and having access to the content that they need to answer any critical questions that they might have, I don't necessarily want to have to still come into, even though it's consolidated in one place, I don't necessarily want to have to come into a catalog every day to find the content again and, access things on an ongoing basis. And in a catalog, I still might have access to a lot of content, but there's certain things that I probably look at on a regular basis. And so we have the ability within the Metric Insights portal to create very customized user experiences on top of the catalog that are persona based, that for a particular type of user give them very easy access to metrics and content that they need on a day-to-day basis, again, regardless of the underlying source where that content might have been created. So oftentimes it's things like mashing up content onto a single page. If there's a few reports that I look at every day from different tools and technologies, rather than logging into those in different places, I can get a view of them all on one page. It's things like having a metrics first experience. So if there's a dozen reports that might have interesting information for me on a day-to-day basis, rather than, excuse me, having to drill through those reports every day and figure out what's going on, let's summarize some key metrics. Let's track those metrics. And if something goes awry, let's alert the user and allow them to drill into the metrics and the underlying content that have critical things that I should be addressing. So we'll look at some examples of this, but the key is being able to have an experience for the end user that is very relevant to them and how they interact with BI. So let's transition into the product. Let's talk through these different layers of the solution here and give you a demo of some of these things and bring them more to life. Okay, so we're in the browser here. We have an instance of Metric Insights running in this environment. It's connected to a whole host of different tools and technologies. You'll see in a minute when we get into the catalog, multiple BI tools, documents, spreadsheets, databases even. And the first piece that we discussed in that slide was once we're connected to tools and technologies, being really able to analyze what's going on with the content that we have today so that we can start to have sort of this rationalization effort to tidy up what's there. And so this is the BI ops layer that I spoke about. And the way we address it is from two perspectives. One is identifying potentially obsolete content, so content that's not useful anymore, that's not getting used. And the second is looking at potential duplicative content that we could combine or retire if there's something out there that answers the same question. So what's going on here, and I'm using Tableau and Power BI as an example, is we're connected to a number of instances of those technologies. So we've got two Tableau servers running. We've got a connection to our cloud Power BI instance here. And currently we're focusing on unused content. So something that we get through our plugins with a lot of these technologies where it's available is the usage of reports and dashboards over time. And we're able to pull that in and look at that trend of usage. So simple examples in this case, when I expand a particular technology on the left here, this is representing the organizational structure of that technology. So in Tableau's case, we're looking at different sites, different projects, and then particular workbooks and worksheets that we have within there. And it's simply, in this case, highlighting anything that over a 60-day period has not got, over a 90-day period, we've got it set to here, has not had any usage. So no users have accessed this content. And obviously these are candidates for things that we could look at and retire. If I expand a particular folder here, I get down the bottom the unused content in that folder. I can focus on a particular one as well, and look at the details behind that. But in this case, I've got a copy of a Healthcare One dashboard that's been created. Looks like it was created not long ago by admin. It's been updating, or it hasn't updated since we last created it. It looked like 39 users have had access to that, but it's not being used in the last 90 days. I I can also look at things like lineage for this dashboard. If we have it, I'll show you some examples there. But effectively, this is a candidate then that we could go and retire. So unused content is one thing. The other then is potentially duplicative content. So similar structure here. It's identifying effectively clusters of potential duplicate reports out there. So what does that mean? Well, in our default site here, I've got some of these things that are highlighted as main. And what that means is if I click on this sales analysis cluster here, it's identified 3 reports here that are potential duplicates. It's highlighted the sales analysis one as the main report in the cluster because it's the one in this case that has had the most views over the last 90 days. And then again, it's identified 2 potential duplicates of that have had less views. It's defined the overlap, and I'll talk about what the overlap is in a minute, as very high. So there's a 98% overlap between these reports, and we'll talk about what that means. And it looks like it's been shared with the same sort of group of users have access to these reports. I can drill into this and see who those users are. So if this is a potential cluster of duplicates, I might want to drill in a little bit more. So if we take this sales analysis with dates and click on the compare, we can compare it to the main report in this cluster. So I can see the usage that we looked at before. I can look at the lineage of this report. So in this case, the main report in the cluster, sales analysis in the middle here, was built off of a daily sales summary table that's coming from a database called demo metadata. And this report is actually being used in some distributions that are going out in the Metric Insights platform. And we'll look at this as we get into the product. But, I can tell from this that, a few hundred views in the last 90 days, and it looks like it's being sent out in a number of different distributions here. The second report that we're comparing it to looks like it's coming from the same place. So it's coming from the same database. It's built in the same table, but we're not getting as many views as we saw, and it doesn't seem to be used in any distributions that are going out. As I scroll down here and look at the comparison, this table is showing me the overlapping columns in each of these workbooks. So in this case, I can see there's a 100% match in terms of the columns that are being used in the report. This is the lineage overlap that we were just looking at, but down to the column level. So I saw they were both based on the same table here, but they're also pulling data from exactly the same columns as well. And then down the bottom, we look at additional metadata, in this case, the titles of those reports. Are there overlaps in terms of what the titles are? And generally, they both are called sales analysis. And this one has also got a qualifier that it's using dates or something. But in general, this is where the 98% overlap is coming from. So this is clearly a good candidate for a potential duplicate. As a final check, I probably might want to come in and look at these reports as well, check that they're not doing something completely different from a visual perspective. And sure enough, when I compare these two side by side, they look almost identical and probably are identical. So this is a candidate for one where we can probably get rid of this. Before I do that, I may want to assign it to someone. I may want to push it into a little workflow where we can set the status, have someone check on it, say whether it wants to get deleted or not. Or if I determine that actually this is a report that's being used for a different process, even though there's a lot of overlap, it's something I want to keep, I might just remove this from that duplicate cluster so we tidy it up and it's no longer considered a duplicate. So the first step of this process of getting an effective portal in place is starting to, again, rationalize what's there today, starting to tidy up these environments. This can tie into, obviously, one person is typically not going to do this process. We're going to look at ownership of this content and make sure that we're notifying users who have potential duplicates or unused content, that they're things that they might want to tidy up and clean up. We use our distribution engine to do that. So, across a sort of organization, people responsible for BI might be getting distributions like this on an ongoing basis, saying, "Hey, as we look at the content that's out there, you have 3 reports that are, rarely used or not used at all. Go check these out. You have 4 reports that are potential duplicates that you might want to go and look at and see whether you can consolidate these and get rid of some stuff that is potentially not needed anymore." The other way we can use distribution is as well is as in large organizations where you have potentially distributed creation of content going on, so different teams creating reports and dashboards. It's not always clear what else is out there that's being created. And so I'm always at risk of spending time and creating something that already exists. And so as I'm working through and creating content and saving that content, metric insights can be tracking again in a similar way to what we were just looking at. So, maybe I published a draft report here that I'm working on, and immediately we can pick up that potentially this is overlapping with something that's out there already. In this case, you're creating a report in Tableau, but there's this one in Power BI that's very similar in terms of that metadata and lineage that we just looked at. Is this something you really need? So we've rationalized environments. We're starting to tidy things up. Um, we then look at publishing what's left into the idea of a centralized catalog. So what you're looking at now is the Metric Insights catalog. Again, it's connected to all those tools and technologies more than just the Tableau and Power BI that we were looking at. We've got some click content here, business objects. We've got some local files. These are files that might be being shared, stored on SharePoint or file stores. Various tools and technologies here, probably slightly unrealistic in terms of the numbers that a typical organization might have. But each of these tiles that we have in here is a particular report that has been published into this catalog. And we'll talk about the publishing process in a minute, but let's just continue to look at the organization of this content now. So each of these tiles is something that's been published and organized on the left-hand side here in a category structure that makes sense for your organization. So this is now a single hierarchy that is tool independent. So I can combine content from different tools into the same categories and structure that we're seeing here. And obviously, again, this would reflect your organization. Categories are always tied to security and permissions. So I'm in as an admin right now, but as an end user of this, I'm only going to see the categories of content and the tiles that I have access to and permissions to see. So what is a tile? If we take a look at some of these, if I click on the sales analysis one here, when we publish a piece of content, if you remember right back to the initial slides, I mentioned we pick up metadata around that content. So here we're getting a preview of a workbook in Tableau. We've picked up obviously the name of that workbook from Tableau. We've picked up a description here of what it is. We pick up a image of this content every time it updates, so users can get an accurate sort of view of what the dashboard looks like right now from a visual perspective. Also helps with the thumbnail on the tile. If I'm familiar with a dashboard, that it's easy to get a visual cue of what I'm looking for and pick it out easily. But I also mentioned metadata might be coming from other places. I mentioned things like data catalogs, Calibra, Relation, Atlan, whatever it might be. Because as we saw in the BI ops level, we pick up a lineage for this content and where it's coming from. If in your data catalog you're maybe adding metadata to your table structure, maybe you're identifying where there's PII data or sensitive information. Because we know this dashboard or workbook is based on those tables where you've highlighted that stuff, we can pull it in and attach it to the reports that contain that data. So in this case, and maybe that database table has been marked as confidential in your data catalog in Elation, and we want to make sure users are aware of that. Maybe it's in another case, it might have been tagged with PII data, personal identifiable information. We want users to be aware of that. So we can tie the metadata from the table level into the reports at the point of consumption. You might add things like ownership as well. All these fields are completely customizable for your organization and what makes sense for the content that we're looking at. We also have the concept of a glossary. So where you can have things like metric definitions or term definitions, calculations, ownership of those definitions. You can manage this within Metric Insights and attach it to content. Again, if you're doing this today in your data catalog or somewhere else, you can pull that in and synchronize it with the Metric Insights BI catalog. If I click into a piece of content, what we do is we render a live version of that dashboard in the Metric Insights catalog. So what you're seeing here is Tableau now running inside of the Metric Insights viewer. I'm being kept within Metric Insights, so I don't really need to know this was created in Tableau, but I've got full access to the live dashboard now. When I clicked on that tile, it did a single sign-on into Metric Insights, so I'm accessing this as my user. So any sort of row-level security or permissions are persisted, and I can interact with this in the same way. So whether I'm looking at Tableau, whether I'm clicking into, say, a Power BI tile, the only real difference now is the tool that I'm interacting with in the middle here. To the user, it becomes a more seamless end user experience. I don't have to jump back and forth between different tools and technologies. And that goes as well for things like files and PDFs and spreadsheets. Again, you can attach to the sources of that content, those documents, you can pull them in, you can add metadata in the same way. In this case, we're looking at a spreadsheet that we're PDFing for purposes of rendering it in the browser. It's pulling it from a file on SharePoint. We have different versions of that dashboard out there or this spreadsheet out there, and I can flip between those different versions in the viewer here. So we take this content, we bring it all together, we categorize it in one place. There's different organizational paradigms on the left here. So I can create shared folders of content simply by dragging tiles into a folder. I can share those folders with other users. By clicking on a star or dragging on a tile, I can create a personal favorites folder. So these are things that I might come in and see every day that is specific to me. But ultimately, again, it's an organizational paradigm where, irrespective of source, I can organize everything in one place. There is also search here. So I can go and search across the catalog of content that I have access to. It's a Google search paradigm, so recommends common search terms, recommends content that is commonly accessed with those search terms. When I run the search, I get a ranked set of search results, similar again to a Google experience where I can see the content ranked around that. So we're looking at that search term through the metadata. I can filter out by different metadata on the left-hand side and access that. I mentioned that when we create the catalog, we're syncing with permissions and security. So the default sort of experience here is that when I come in, I'm only going to see content that I have access to. And I have another browser open here where I'm logged in as a different user, sales manager maybe in this case. I have access to a subset of the categories here. I have some functional differences. Obviously, I can't edit these tiles like the admin could. And so, yeah, it's restricting it to the permissions around what I can see. There is the option of publishing content in what we call a discoverable way. And what that means is we somewhat override that permissions model. And if content has been published in a discoverable way, as I'm browsing or searching through the catalog, I may see things like this, where in this case, this report was published discoverably. It's got a padlock and the image is blurred out because I actually don't have permissions to see it in the underlying tool. If I click on that though and think it's something that might be useful, I can see the metadata around it and what it contains and what metrics are in there. I just can't see the dashboard and the data itself, but it might be something that I want to request access to. And so by publishing stuff in a discoverable way, you can, again, eliminate a lot of this duplicative content getting created. As an analyst, I might come in and say, okay, I'm going to create a report around customer purchase patterns. I just do anything for that, but let's look and see whether anything else is out there that someone else might have created that I haven't got access to, and so I don't create a duplicate effort. Or I'm someone in the business where I don't have the default permission to see this, but like this for my job. Today, I would pick up the phone and ask someone to create a version of this. Well, if I know it's out there, I can just request access. So the catalog is the first step in terms of organizing content. The way content gets into the catalog is our plugins are continually monitoring the content that's getting created in the different tools and technologies. When content gets created, it can get into the portal in a variety of ways, but a common one is through the concept of what we call publishing workflows. Think of this as sort of a process that reports and dashboards go through before they ultimately get certified and put into the catalog that we were just looking at. Excuse me. A workflow can have as many stages and steps as makes sense for the content that you're publishing. So in this case, it's a fairly stringent process that is going to, when it gets created, it comes into this pending review bucket. It will be picked up out of this bucket and assigned to initially the developer of that content, where they will, sign off on the fact that it's ready and a candidate for the catalog. At which point it will be moved to in this case, the business owner of this. So maybe it's a financial report that gets updated every quarter that's going out to our board or the street. The developer signs off on it. It goes to the CFO or the VP of finance who will look at it. Maybe as part of this stage, they're also responsible for adding in additional metadata like descriptions or tags, whatever might make sense in your organization. Before then, it goes to our governance team. Our data stewards sign off on it and say, yes, it looks good. And eventually, someone publishes and certifies it into the catalog. Now, it could be a process like this. Equally, it might be a very quick process where it's just a report that we're using for our department. It comes in, the person who owns that report signs off on it, and it gets published. As part of these publishing workflows, there might also be a review stage or an attestation stage. Again, I mentioned right up front that most reports and dashboards have a shelf life to them. So, when we publish a report, we might set the clock running and say, okay, after 6 months, let's highlight this for review again. Let's put it back into the queue and say, okay, is this something that's still useful to users? Is it something that we need to update or retire because it's become obsolete? The way we make those decisions is that every report within here, we are tracking two things. We're tracking usage of the content. So at any point in time, I can see, out of the reports that I'm responsible for, what's being used, what's potentially I've published recently that's increasing in usage, what's decreasing in usage because it's sort of getting towards its sell by date, and what's going unused. I can look at this down to the individual user level, the user groups, the tools, the technologies, but get an idea of what reports and dashboards are out there and how they're being engaged with. That's a good indicator when something comes up for review to say, okay, is it useful anymore? The other thing we can capture that helps with that decision is we have a feedback mechanism. So any reports that users have access to, we can periodically prompt them to provide feedback on that report. These are feedback prompts that you can customize. It might be a rating type system like we have here. It might be subjective feedback that you ask for, but whatever it is, you can prompt users. And then again, if I'm looking at an individual report, I can look at that engagement alongside the usage, sorry, the feedback and the scores that I'm getting for that. So in this case, I can see a report, suddenly is not getting used anymore. I can look at the feedback and see whether it's something that there's an alternative for, looks like it uses old data. Maybe we need to retire this. So we manage an organized catalog. We make sure that we're only showing content to users that are relevant to them. We let them discover content that's out there, and we ensure that the owners of that content are set up to be able to manage it on an ongoing basis and only keep things in that are relevant to their user base and consumer base. The final piece I want to touch on is this concept of the customized user experiences that I spoke about. So obviously you can give users access to the catalog. And obviously they can come in and favorite content and see content that's relevant to them. But again, this is still quite a lot of stuff going on here. And as a user, even I might have access to a lot of content I have permissions to see and a lot of discoverable content. I don't necessarily want to delve through that every day. And so we want to provide these customized persona-based experiences that I mentioned. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples. But really what these are, think of them as sort of mini websites, mini UIs on top of the catalog. So it's still persisting the security and what I have access to, but it's providing a more user-friendly experience to get access to that. And these pages that I'm going to show you can look and feel any which way you want. They can be branded which any way you want. They can again, functionally work any way that makes sense for different personas. And different personas might have access to different experiences, different journeys through the catalog. So in this case, it might be a simple example where rather than landing them in that tile-based view every day, we may have identified that, we've got Andrew here, he's a manager, he's responsible for maybe sales and marketing here or different departments. He's got a favorites folder. And these tiles give me quick access to that content. So maybe if I click into the sales reports here, it's dropping me into an experience where I'm not flipping through different tiles anymore. These are the same folders that I have access to in the catalog, but rather than clicking in and out of tiles, I can very quickly delve through my different reports and dashboards. So here I'm looking at my Power BI dashboard. It's a live dashboard. I may flip through and also look at my sales analysis dashboard every day in Tableau. And again, it's a very quick way of doing that. And without having to firstly go to the different tools, but even within the catalog, look for different tiles. So a different sort of navigation paradigm there. If I go back to the home screen that we provided him, I mentioned this idea of using metrics to drive analysis as well. So when I was looking at that navigation there, there's a lot of reports and dashboards I have access to there. Well, maybe what we want to do is summarize some key metrics out of that content. So something our plugins allow us to do is actually capture data out of these reports as well. This is a metric insights page here where we're rendering metrics from those different reports and dashboards. We're doing some analysis of that content. We're also able to pick up any filters that are being used on that content. So as again a user, I can navigate through those metrics and things that we're looking at. And if I see something that is interesting to me that requires some more attention, I can drill down into that particular metric and get taken straight to the dashboard that it's related to. So in this case, Tableau and that sales analysis dashboard that we've been looking at all along. So again, regardless, in the current environment where potentially I would have to go and look at, what is this, 16 different reports every day where each of these metrics is coming from a different report or different tool, I can get a summary of that and drill into the details. So this metrics first sort of scenario is quite a common one. Um, Another common scenario is looking at sort of mashups of content as well. I mentioned this up front. So let's say we have some regional managers, some country managers out there who are responsible for different departments across those regions. Today we might have multiple tools supporting reporting in those different departments. So sales might be using Tableau in this case and Power BI. HR might be using Power BI. Customer support might be using some stuff from Zendesk or MicroStrategy, whatever it might be. Um, and today, as a country manager, I might have to go out to these different reports and dashboards. But in this case, we can actually mash them up onto a single page. So in this case, again, this is a live Tableau chart worksheet that I've pulled in. This is two reports from Power BI that I'm interested in. This is something I think coming from MicroStrategy. Um, there are also reports that have common filters to them, both dates and in this case regional filters. So maybe I'm responsible for multiple regions, and these reports I have to look at every day, and today I have to go in and filter down to the different regions to see what's going on. Well, allow me to filter in one go, so be able to pick a particular and very quickly look at this content. And obviously, I could drill in and look at the more detailed dashboards if there's something I want to detail. So we went over a lot of content there. Have call for any questions into the QA and chat window. But again, to just summarize here. Uh, 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 remove duplicates and obsolete. They're able to manage and publish content into a centralized catalog and portal so that I can see everything in one place and search for things in one place and discover content in one place. And it's about providing a personalized experience through those UIs and customer journeys so that users can very easily get the content that they need. In a way that is simple and easy for them to consume. So thanks for joining us today. Hope this gave you a good insight into the need for a portal and the Metric Insights platform. We look forward to having you on future webinars. Thanks, everyone.